inside. He's probably the most likely well-known figure who would be the VP candidate, but almost looks a bit sordid if it's him because he was the first to endorse. But yeah, look, I think 95% of US senators and governors in the Republican Party will find that they sort of need to go see their hairdresser for a few months rather than try and become vice president under Trump.
You'd think he would want some sort of strategic help from a vice president, even if it's strategic demographic help, to appoint a woman to take on Hillary Clinton's appeal to female voters, for example, or, I don't know, do you think he could find someone ethnic who was happy to run with him?
I think a woman's the most likely, but he said he doesn't want another outsider. He wants someone who's an established, politician who knows the political ropes.
Oh, yeah.
And there's not a lot of senior Republican women who are backing him. So, there's no obvious candidates there. They've got some very good, strong women like Nikki Haley, one of their governors, but she's certainly not a Trump fan. So, let's not get ahead of us, though. He hasn't quite won the nomination yet, so he might never get to pick a VP, but it will be very, very interesting.
Given his popularity, Mei Chen, I mean, it's a pretty good opportunity for someone to become world famous overnight, right?
In my experience of human nature, if it's looking as if he will win, including not just the nomination but the presidential election, everyone will find that they are best friends with him. They forget. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen so many times. People have said, no, and then it happens and the person ends up being Deputy Prime Minister or Minister of Foreign Affairs or whatever else, and everybody revises their view. So
it is an important pick because you can't rule out that if he does win the election, which is unlikely, according to all the polls, that he's got record unfavourability. But he's said he's going to do stuff which is illegal. The CIA, the NSA have come and said, look, we just will refuse to do that. We're not going to torture people. We're not going to kill innocent family members. But he could get impeached if he does get elected. So the vice president he picks may become president. In fact, it's probably more likely under him than anyone else. So
I've just forgotten the name of the Alaskan...
Sarah Palin.
Yeah, I mean, didn't Sarah endorse the Don?
Yes, she's campaigning. She's one of his big surrogates, but she didn't do too well with McCain, and she's not been into political office. She's more a Fox News commentator than a sort of political establishment figure.
Yeah, it depends on what Donald thinks, though, doesn't it?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, he said what he wants, but he may pick his daughter Ivanka. That would probably be a very popular move. She's seen as universally, everyone says there's nothing bad you can say about her.
As in her popularity rather than her suitability to be president, I'm assuming you mean.
Oh, she's probably better qualified than Donald.
Apparently, that Ben Carson has not ruled out being VP, joining the tickets. He is African-American, so ticks one of the boxes. Also, Newt Gingrich. Do you know much about him, David?
Oh, indeed. I think that would be a bit of a return to the past, though. There's, like I say, there's no obvious current establishment figure. There's people who used to be in politics like Newt, like Sarah Palin, etc. But look, May's right about human nature. Yeah. The thing is, I suspect he has to pick his VP candidate before the polls close. I think inevitably the polls will get a bit closer, but at this stage, there's a huge gap between him and Clinton.
David, he will find a running mate. I am not
of course he will.
About this because there will be somebody out there who will want to be made world famous. They will see it in their own self-interest to do it. It won't have anything to do with him. But at the end of the day, if they stand next to him, no doubt they will become recognised and famous.
Maybe they should rename it from Vice President to The Apprentice in the United States.
You're fired.
Yeah, great way to finish. All right. Hey, Mei Chen, great to see you.
Thank you.
I'll be in touch about that job. And David Farrer, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
And that is a panel for another day. I'm in tomorrow as well, but Jim will be back on Wednesday. Thanks so much for listening. Checkpoint with John Campbell is next.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell on behalf of the Checkpoint team. Thank you for joining us. Tonight, their hospital food has been heavily criticised. Compass, we look at how much tax they're paying in New Zealand. Keytruda and its efficacy. The company that makes it tells the Minister of Health that Pharmac's been using data that gives a misleading and false impression of how effective it is. Je suis désolé, says the French Prime Minister, although with a much better French accent. The Warriors, more troubles off the field. Bill Savisi is farewelled in great style and with fine tunes on the ukulele, of course. And why is it still so warm? And should we be worried about that? All of that and more between now and 6:30, or 6, as they say in France. But first, here is RNZ News with Katrina Batten.
Kia ora, good evening. A tax expert is questioning the way the hospital catering company Compass is paying its taxes following a series of loans made to its British parent. The company paid $2 million in tax last year, or just over 1% of its revenue of $170 million. Accounts filed with the company's office show its British parents has borrowed $33 million over the past 4 years, while fees and royalties have quadrupled. A tax consultant, Terry Boucher, says intra-company loans are commonly used by multinationals to legally shift money around, and it's interesting these loans have never been repaid.
It was unusual to see. It's not perhaps surprising intercompany advances go on all the time, but you would think that given low rates of interest available in the UK, there was no need for those advances to be made.
Terry Boucher, Compass has declined to say what the loans are for or if they're a way of avoiding tax. The maker of the drug Keytruda is accusing the drug buying agency Pharmac of underplaying evidence about the drug's effectiveness. Pressure is mounting on Pharmac to fund one of 2 new immunotherapy drugs for the treatment of advanced melanoma. One of those drugs is Keytruda, made by Merck Sharp and Dohme. In a letter released to RNZ News under the Official Information Act, Merck has complained to the Health Minister about Pharmac. It says the latest clinical data it gave the agency before key committee meetings was not reviewed or reported in the minutes. It says the findings it provided showed much greater benefit to patients from Keytruda than the clinical paper Pharmac reviewed. The French Prime Minister says the Rainbow Warrior bombing 30 years ago was a huge mistake. Manuel Valls has made a fleeting trip to New Zealand, the first visit by a French Prime Minister for 25 years. In July 1985, French spies detonated 2 mines attached to the side of the Greenpeace protest ship Rainbow Warrior, berthed at Auckland's Marsden Wharf. The ship sank and a photographer, Fernando Pereira, drowned. Mr. Valls said today the relationship between New Zealand and France has improved since then.
It's true that 30 years ago our relationship was quite challenging. Michel Rocard, when he came here 25 years ago, that we had made a huge mistake. But I think that we have now turned over a new leaf. Our relationship has changed.
The translated words of the French Prime Minister Manuel Valls. An American tourist has appeared in court this afternoon charged with causing the deaths of 2 people in a crash near Kerikeri at the weekend. He's also charged with injuring 2 others in the head-on collision on State Highway 10 on Saturday evening. The 66-year-old Californian, who was driving a rental car, has been charged with careless driving causing death and injury. The police say he turned from Poketona Road into the right-hand lane instead of the left, and a short distance later his vehicle collided with a northbound car. The 2 women in that car who died at the scene were Kylie Ann Ruckich of Ahipara and Virginia Keogh of Whangarei. The Chief Executive of MediaWorks, Mark Weldon, says he still has the confidence of the company's board after a long meeting today. There were rumours Mr Weldon would step down after the TV3 newsreader Hilary Barry resigned on Friday, the latest in a string of high-profile resignations and redundancies. However, he emerged from the meeting an hour ago with his job apparently still intact.
It was a good meeting today, actually.
And what was the outcome?
Look, I think the chairman might... it's up to him if he says something, but it was a good meeting. So,
Do you still have your job?
Mr. Weldon? Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Mark Weldon of MediaWorks. Family and friends have gathered today to celebrate the life of the man credited with popularising Hawaiian-style music in New Zealand and throughout the Pacific. Bill Savassi died last month, aged 92. At his funeral at the Holy Trinity Cathedral in Auckland today, family and friends were greeted by school children playing ukuleles. Savassi dedicated much of his later life to education, working with the Play It Strange program to teach children his signature instrument. The program's chief executive, former Split Ends member Mike Chun, says Savassi believed everyone should play.
We can talk about instruments, we can talk about recordings, we can talk about songwriting. Songwriting's the foundation, but it's the love of your fellow man that drives his vision on. People are united, and you are the man behind it, Bill. You are and will always be a beautiful person, and I salute you.
Mike Chun at Bill Savassi's funeral today. In sport, the New Zealand Warriors are refusing to comment further on the suspension of 6 players despite new allegations about their behaviour. The players were suspended for the NRL game against the Dragons yesterday and have since been denied selection for the Kiwis test against Australia in Newcastle on Friday. The New Zealand Herald is reporting some of them mixed prescription drugs with energy drinks. Kiwis coach Steve Kearney says he was involved in the decision to stand down the players from his side, and the fact that he loses 2 of his more experienced players in Manu Vatavai and Ben Matulino doesn't matter.
Regardless of who the player is, we have a protocol which it's important that we stick to our values and what we want to stand for as a team, and those issues didn't fit what we were after.
Steve Kearney. The Olympic Rugby 7 squad is taking shape. Sir Gordon Titchens has included injured captain Scott Curry and 2 Test All Black halfback Augustine Pulu in his trial squad. Curry will travel with the 16-man squad for the last 2 tournaments of the World Series but won't play. Pulu returns to the team for the first time since breaking his arm in February. Former All Black Sonny Bill Williams and Liam Messam are both in the squad. That's the news.
Disconnected for 2 hours.
This type of fault is unacceptable and we want to get to the bottom of what actually happened. We do know that some of the callers were calling back on numerous occasions.
Missing for 4 days.
She carried me on her back. I lost all feeling in my legs and my hands completely after I fell in the water.
Leaving after 23 years.
Those 2 names really are just the tip of the iceberg. This has to be the highest turnover in TV3 history.
Time to switch on Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Guy and Espiner weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, Environment Minister Nick Smith on the big question surrounding water. Who owns it? Should there be a price on it? And what are the rights and interests of Māori in it? And after 10, the water care engineer who lost both his legs in an underground gas explosion but went on to compete in the New York Marathon. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
The Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waikato, also Coromandel Bay of Plenty and Taupō. Fine spells and isolated showers. Waitomo, Taumaranui and northern Taranaki, cloudy periods and a few showers. Manawatu, Whanganui, Taihape and southern Taranaki, fine with high cloud. Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine with variable high cloud. Brief rain in Wairarapa tomorrow morning. Wellington, Horowhenua and Kapiti Coast, a few showers developing this evening, turning to occasional rain tomorrow. Nelson and Bulla, rain developing in Bulla this evening with heavy falls, scattered falls spreading to Nelson at times. Canterbury and Marlborough mainly fine, scattered rain developing about northern and western Marlborough overnight. Westland and Fiordland, rain with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms, easing to coastal showers in Fiordland late afternoon and clearing from Westland overnight. Otago and Southland, scattered rain, clearing this evening and becoming fine, and the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy. It's 9 minutes past 5.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Lots on the programme tonight. We are going to go up to the far north in about 50 minutes' time to discuss this accident in which 2 women were killed involving an American tourist here on holiday. But we're going to begin with the catering company Compass, which has been under fire for the food it's been serving up to hospital patients. Obviously, lots on that in the news in the past few weeks. But now some questions are being asked about whether the multinational is paying enough tax. RNZ can reveal Compass New Zealand has been funding its British-based British-based parent millions of dollars, lending its British-based parent millions of dollars, none of which has been paid back as far as we can see, while the fees and royalties it's paying to the UK have quadrupled over the past 4 years. Tax experts say transactions are commonly used by multinationals to shift profits between subsidiaries to minimise tax that is paid. Anusha Bradley reports.
Compass is one of the world's biggest catering companies and supplies nearly half of all public hospital meals in New Zealand. Accounts filed with the company's office show its New Zealand arm has been lending the company's British parent millions of dollars. Those loans have increased sixfold over the past 4 years to $33 million, while royalties and fees over the same period have quadrupled. Such so-called transfer pricing transactions are all legal. But an Auckland tax consultant, Terry Boucher, describes the loans as interesting, especially given the interest rate is a lot higher than what Compass would pay for borrowing money in the UK.
It was unusual to see. It's not perhaps surprising intercompany advances go on all the time, but you would think that given low rates of interest available in the UK, there was no need for those advances to be made. And you'd also expect a dividend could have also been paid up from Compass here to its UK parents.
RNZ News asked Compass to explain why a multinational that made a global profit of $2.5 billion last year needed to borrow $33 million from its New Zealand arm. In a statement, Compass says there are no loans. It says the figures shown in the accounts are a standard cash deposit facility used by Compass to manage its working capital requirements. But the accounts filed with the company's office state they are loans. Here's what they say.
The receivables from related parties arise mainly from loans and are receivable on call.
Compass New Zealand hasn't paid a dividend since 2012, but has paid about $1 million in fees and services to its Australian arm each year, while fees and royalties to its British parent have quadrupled over that 4-year period to $3.5 million. Dividends and royalties are taxed by inland revenue, loans are not. Compass New Zealand paid $2 million in tax last year, just over 1% of its revenue of $170 million. Compass says it pays that amount because its costs are high and its margins low. A professor of tax at Auckland University, Craig Eliff, says intra-company loans, along with fees and royalties paid to parent companies, are all used by multinationals to move profits around.
If they've got more money than they can use in their New Zealand operations, you would expect it to be repatriated by way of a dividend. The dividend, of course, would be subject to withholding tax. So this could be viewed as effectively a device or a mechanism of effectively repatriating the cash without paying a dividend.
Compass says it's required by law to pay fees to its affiliates for any support received from them. It did not answer questions about whether it was trying to avoid paying tax in this country, but it did point out that it employs 4,000 people and expects to spend $70 million with suppliers in New Zealand this year. The Green Party co-leader James Shaw says New Zealand needs to follow Australia's lead in tightening rules around transactions between multinational subsidiaries.
One of which would be compulsory reporting from multinational companies about how they're accounting for their transfer pricing. Because currently in New Zealand they don't have to actually report on that, and so it's very, very difficult to get a clear picture of what's going on. The second thing would be greater resourcing of inland revenue to police the issue.
James Shaw questions the value of outsourcing public services to multinational firms that try to pay as little tax as possible. For Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
We'd really like to reiterate our bid for Compass to come on the program and discuss all of the issues Anusha raises are live on Checkpoint tonight, if they're so inclined. It's 5:13. We turn now to a claim by the drug company that makes Keytruda that Pharmac has been using incorrect data, which gives, and I quote, a false and misleading impression of how effective the drug is. The claim was made in a letter to the Minister of Health late last year. Checkpoint has obtained that letter under the Official Information Act. This comes as Pharmac considers the efficacy of immunotherapy drugs in the fight against advanced cancer, and the government considers their cost. With the budget this month and the government looking at funding increases so Pharmac can meet the high cost of drugs like Keytruda, an emotive and very public debate has been taking place about whether the new drugs represent value for money. Key to this, of course, is how effective they are. And in the letter obtained by Checkpoint, Keytruda's maker tells the minister that some data being used is, quote, false and misleading, and they've no idea why more recent data was, and again I quote, ignored. The letter is dated December 10 last year. In it, MSD, Merck Sharp and Dohme says,
in the recent debate over the efficacy of Keytruda, there's been some confusion because the most up-to-date and correct clinical data hasn't always been referenced in the figures given to the media and to the wider public.
Now, this is important because in the frequently emotive toing and froing over funding Keytruda, which costs as much as $200,000 per treatment, dispassionate data about efficacy and long-term survival rates is key. This is what Pharmac's Sarah Fitt told us on Checkpoint in February.
The data we've looked at, both supplied by the company and also the advice we get independently, is that there is a response, but what we are really looking for is an improved outcome for these patients, that we want to see survival benefit. It's an expensive treatment, and we want to be sure that we are giving a drug that's going to get a good response for these patients in the longer term.
Are you denying, though, that the phase 3 trials are showing survivor benefits?
At the moment, yes, no trial has shown a survival benefit. It's showing a response, and it's an earlier response, but we need to see longer-term survival data. And that's the advice we've got from our clinical committee.
So that was February. But 2 months earlier than that interview, in their December letter to Health Minister Jonathan Coleman, MSD complains Pharmac is not using up-to-date and correct clinical data. Their letter continues.
This is of significant concern as the use of incorrect data gives a misleading and false impression of how effective this breakthrough drug is in the treatment of melanoma.
A misleading and false impression. Now, this letter is not to Pharmac, but about it. The recipient is the Minister of Health. But it states Pharmac has received clinical data it's not publicly using. The letter continues.
Merck, Sharp and Dohme would like to highlight that the latest clinical data given to Pharmac was not viewed or reported in the Pharmac minutes.
And the letter's author, MSD's New Zealand head, Paul Smith, concludes,
we're at a loss as to why this most up-to-date data was ignored.
Up-to-date data is crucial in such cases, as Pharmac states publicly that it's not yet persuasively conclusive in the complex balancing act of cost versus efficacy. In Australia, less data and less positive data has seen the drug funded. Checkpoint contacted Pharmac's Australian equivalent. It wouldn't be interviewed, but confirmed the recommendation to list Keytruda was made in March of last year. That was done with earlier data and less positive data than Pharmac has now been provided with. Georgina Long is Professor of Melanoma Medical Oncology. She works with the Melanoma Institute Australia, the University of Sydney and Royal North Shore Hospital. Her assessment of Keytruda's efficacy?
Absolutely no doubt that anti-PD-1 therapies improve the outcomes of patients with metastatic melanoma and do it extraordinarily well. I don't believe there are many bodies in the world that would agree with that assessment. Certainly the field of melanoma and the academics within the field of melanoma would find that very difficult to believe, given the data and the evidence that we have on anti-PD-1 therapies. It's revolutionised cancer treatment.
So when Pharmac says to the people of New Zealand, look, we're not funding this yet because the evidence is insufficient, does that make sense to you?
Look, I cannot comment on the processes within New Zealand. I'm not sure what the criteria that Pharmac require. I cannot comment at all. All I can say is, as a clinician who sees a lot of melanoma, and melanoma is a cancer that disproportionately impacts young people. You know, yes, it's high in older people, but for young people who don't get cancer, melanoma is number one in Australia, and I'm sure it's near that in New Zealand, considering that New Zealand now has taken the podium as the highest incidence of melanoma in the world. All I can say is, someone who just treats melanoma and sees many, many hundreds of patients a year, I find it very difficult to think that people cannot access these drugs.
Georgina Long talking to us from Australia. Now, Merck, Sharp and Dome also said in another letter to Health Minister Jonathan Coleman, this one from last November, also released to Checkpoint under the Official Information Act, that Keytruda could be listed on the New Zealand pharmaceutical schedule as early as February 1st, 2016. So that is the February that has now well and truly passed. We asked Pharmac for a response today. We are waiting to hear from them. Dr. Chris Jackson is a Dunedin-based oncologist, and he's the medical director of the Cancer Society of New Zealand. I asked him about the efficacy of Keytruda and a drug that does a very similar job but made by another company called nivolumab, and how long that data has been available.
Well, it's very clear that pembrolizumab and nivolumab, these two drugs which are part of these new checkpoint inhibitors, are light years ahead of anything we've ever seen before for melanoma. They work by switching off the tumour's defences against the immune system to allow the immune cells to get into the tumour and to do its magic. They work in about 2/3 of people who take them. So about 1/3 of people have a major shrinkage of their tumours, and 1/3 of people have a more modest degree of shrinkage, and about 1/3 of people see no response at all.
And how does that compare with the current treatment, which, as far as I'm aware, consists entirely of chemotherapy?
So chemotherapy has never been shown to extend life ever in any clinical study. And both pembrolizumab and nivolumab, or Opdivo, they both improve length of life compared to what we've got. So it's very clear that these new treatments are a major, major improvement on anything we've ever seen before.
You used the phrase light years during your first answer. Yes. Would Pharmac be aware that the two drugs you're talking about, both forms of immunotherapy, are light years ahead of the alternative chemotherapy?
Well, I would hope so. The data has certainly been around for some time now. The most recent updates were published in the world's biggest medical journal in June of last year, and that information is freely available to clinicians and patients alike.
Okay. So when Pharmac says the issue is around how efficacious this is, both instantly in the short term and over a longer term, is there doubt around that?
I think that when you've got a newer drug, you can always say, well, we'll have more information in 6 months, we'll have more information in 2 years, we'll have more information in 5 years. Of course, you will. But is there enough information today to recommend these new drugs as the new standard of care for patients in our care? And the answer very clearly, in the opinion of every oncologist I've spoken to, is clearly yes. So nobody would recommend chemotherapy as a standard of care anywhere in the developed world. And these drugs, there are other options for melanoma, but these probably work for the majority of people compared to other treatments, and they're clearly an improvement over what we've had before.
Okay, so therefore, is the debate not about efficacy but about cost? And it's just that no one actually wants to say that.
Yes.
So is it because Keytruda is, what, $200,000 a course or somewhere in that ballpark? It's an expensive drug, right?
There's no doubt that these are very expensive drugs, absolutely no doubt. They cost somewhere around about $10,000 a dose, that neck of the woods, but people are only on them for as long as they work. So those people who, people who say, oh, it costs $200,000, that's because the people whom are on it for a very, very long time are benefiting from it from a very, very long period of time. So if the drug's not working, you don't stay on it, and so your cost exposure is very low.
In fact, if the drug's not working, to be blunt, you die, don't you?
Yes, that's right. Unfortunately, that's true.
So when it's very expensive, that's because you're staying alive.
That's right. It's staying alive and it's working very, very well. But they are very expensive drugs, and I think the drug companies need to own that, and they need to look to try and find any way they can to bring the prices down. And the price of these new cancer drugs is climbing every year. Now, Pharmac is very good at getting us low prices for our drugs compared to other countries, and they're very good at doing deals. But this drug has got over the line in Australia, in Canada, and the UK, so we would be hopeful that Pharmac would be able to do some kind of deal to get it over the line here in New Zealand too. There is no self-respecting melanoma oncologist who I know of who thinks that chemo is acceptable. Everyone who I know of thinks that these are very good drugs, and everyone knows they improve life expectancy over our current therapies. But we also all agree that they are very expensive drugs. Whether they are the best use of Pharmac's funds, well, that's their call actually. But what we want some reassurance around is the process, and to make sure that it's clear and transparent and all that sort of carry on.
Have you any idea how long the longest survivors under these two forms of immunotherapy have been taking them for?
Worldwide, no. I've looked after some people who had the drugs on clinical studies who are still alive 3 and 4 years later. So that's pretty much some of the earliest patients who are on these drugs in New Zealand, and people whom internationally have gone into long-term remission with no signs of cancer at all. I've certainly heard plenty of anecdotes about that abroad. So some people would be considered cured by these drugs, but I think the trial data, most of us would say, they extend life rather than they cure people. I think we can certainly say they extend life, they improve longevity, and the very long-term 5-year, 10-year data, that's still cooking.
Chris Jackson, Medical Director of the Cancer Society of New Zealand. Coming up to 5:25. Coming up next on Checkpoint, an American tourist has appeared in court this afternoon charged with causing the deaths of 2 people in a crash near Kirikiri at the weekend. The far north, of course. The Warriors rule out 6 players from Friday night's Anzac Test. That's with the Kiwis against Australia. And the French president of New Zealand on a fleeting visit admits the Rainbow Warrior bombing that took place 30 years ago was a huge mistake. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. You know how to get hold of us, of course. You can text 2101, email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, or go to our Twitter or Facebook pages. Thank you for all your feedback and engagement. An American tourist has appeared in court charged with causing the deaths of 2 people in a crash near Kirikiri. The 66-year-old is also charged with injuring 2 others in a head-on collision that took place on Saturday evening. Our Northland reporter Lois Williams joins us now on the line from Whangarei. Hi Lois, welcome.
Hi John.
Hi, these are fairly serious charges the man's facing, right? What are they?
Yes, he's charged with 2 counts of careless driving causing death and 1 of careless driving causing injury.
Okay, the police have released details about what they say happened. What are they saying?
Well, they haven't released much, but I spoke to a police contact this afternoon who had talked to the couple, and he said what they think happened is that they were driving a rental car. They'd been in New Zealand for a short holiday, and they were about to leave, so they were heading west on what we call Puketona Road. It's actually Black Bridge Road, and that runs from Paihia to State Highway 10. And at Puketona Junction, there's a T-junction where it joins State Highway 10. So he turned left to head for Whangarei, but instead of heading into the left-hand lane, the police believe he headed into the right-hand lane, and the couple just kept driving for a short distance. They came to a bend and hit head-on a car travelling north.
Okay, what can you tell us about the area where the crash happened? I know that area well. It's quite busy, isn't it? Particularly at holiday time.
It is busy. It used to be a real accident spot there, John. It was a real black spot for quite a long time, but it seemed to have improved in recent years. They put some lanes in there that, you know, you can sit while you're waiting to turn right into that at Puketona Junction. There's a right-hand turning lane there. There's a left-hand sort of slip lane if you're turning left into that road, and it's pretty clearly marked.
Yeah.
But I suppose if there were, what the my police contact said is that it was getting on dark. There was no other, traffic around to give him any bearings, and he just reverted to instinct and turned onto the right. But there've been a number of crashes there, quite serious ones over the years.
What do you know about the victims, Lois?
There were 2 women in the oncoming car, 4 people in the car, 2 women in the car. They died at the scene. They were Kylie Ann Rakic, who was 29 from Ahipara, and Virginia Keogh, and she was 44. She came from Whangarei. There was a 21-year-old man driving the car. He was injured and taken to hospital, and an 8-year-old child was also injured.
Gosh, what a terrible business. Lois Williams.
Please say that the American visitors, John, are in absolute anguish over what happened.
Yeah. Terrible. Lois Williams, RNZ's Northland reporter. Thanks so much, Lois, live from Northland. The French Prime Minister says the Rainbow Warrior bombing that took place 30 years ago was a huge mistake. Manuel Valls has been making a fleeting trip to New Zealand, the first visit by a French Prime Minister for 25 years. He and John Key held talks at Auckland Museum this morning and also had dinner together last night. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
In July 1985, French spies detonated 2 mines attached to the side of the Greenpeace protest ship, the Rainbow Warrior, as it sat in dock at Auckland's Marsden Wharf. The ship sank within minutes, drowning the Greenpeace photographer Fernando Pereira and sparking years of outrage at the French government's actions. Speaking through a translator, Manuel Valls says the relationship between New Zealand and France has been patched up since those events.
It's true that 30 years ago our relationship was quite challenging. Michel Rocard, when he came here 25 years ago, that we had made a huge mistake. But I think that we have now turned over a new leaf. Our relationship has changed.
Manuel Valls says the two countries are now committed to looking forward while remembering the past and never committing the same mistake again. John Campbell says there's genuine acknowledgement from the French that the bombing was a terrible mistake.
I'm sure they would never repeat that. They understand the pain and suffering that was undertaken by New Zealanders and the loss of life as a result of their actions. In the end, actually, the relationship has to be stronger than one particular thing that was a big mistake by France, and we have to look forward and put those things behind us. I think the Prime Minister's visit here is just another way of continuing to build on the relationship.
John Campbell also lobbied Mr Valls for support for the former Prime Minister Helen Clark's candidacy for the top job at the United Nations. He says France is an important member of the Security Council because it's one of the 5 permanent members. Mr Campbell says there's zero chance of France using its veto on Helen Clark's bid for the UN job.
And a pretty good chance, actually, under the right circumstances, they would support her. They certainly knew that the work that she'd done, they had respect for the roles that she had played, and France, Helen Clark could ultimately have a very good ally, but it's very early on and there are quite a number of candidates and still possible for other people to come in the race, so people are going to play it quite close to their chest for a while.
Manuel Valls says Ms Clark is very talented and has great experience.
And she's a very good candidate. Obviously, right now it is too early to have a formal opinion on the question, and we'll be negotiating and discussing with each of the candidates.
John Campbell says he spoke to Helen Clark this morning and passed on the feedback he got from the French Prime Minister. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Chris Bramwell.
Coming up on Checkpoint, a Christchurch community group believes the council's flood modelling has been flawed and some flood-prone homes may have been built or be in the process of being rebuilt about 50 centimetres lower than they should be. We go to one of those homes. The Warriors rule out 6 players from Friday night's Anzac Test against Australia. Trouble at mill there, and why the month of May is set to be another warm one. It's kind of nice if you like warm weather, but is it something we should be worried about? Plus, Nona is back to talk business, but first here's Katrina Batten with the headlines.
A tax consultant is questioning the way the hospital catering company Compass is paying its taxes after loans worth $33 million were made to its British parent over the past 4 years. Terry Boucher says multinationals commonly use intra-company loans to legally shift money around, and it's interesting these loans have never been repaid. Compass has declined to say what the loans are for or if they're a way of avoiding tax. The maker of the immunotherapy drug Keytruda is accusing the drug buying agency Pharmac of underplaying evidence about the drug's effectiveness. Pressure is mounting on Pharmac to fund one of 2 new drugs for treating advanced melanoma. Manufacturer Merck Sharp & Dohme has complained to the Health Minister about Pharmac not including the latest clinical data about its drug Keytruda in key committee meetings. The French Prime Minister, as we've just heard, says the Rainbow Warrior bombing 30 years ago was a huge mistake. Manuel Valls has made the first visit to New Zealand by a French Prime Minister for 25 years. He said today the relationship between New Zealand and France has improved since July 1985, when French spies blew up the Greenpeace protest ship Rainbow Warrior in Auckland. An American tourist has appeared in court this afternoon charged with causing the deaths of 2 people and injuring 2 others in a crash on State Highway 10 near Kerikeri on Saturday evening. The police say the 66-year-old Californian who was driving a rental car turned from Puketona Road into the right-hand lane instead of the left. A short distance later, his vehicle collided with a northbound car, killing 2 women. The chief executive of MediaWorks says he still has the confidence of the company's board after a meeting today. There were rumours Mark Weldon would step down after the TV3 newsreader Hilary Barry resigned on Friday, the latest in a string of resignations and redundancies. Mr Weldon was asked if he emerged from the meeting if he still had the board's confidence, and he replied, "I think so." Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6 with more news, sport and weather.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Let's go to the big news in the world of business today is Westpac New Zealand's first half result. But the big news in the world of RNZ business is that Nona Peltier is back. Wonderful to have you back. And if anyone watching on the television, Nona, your dress just would brighten everyone's day.
Well, thanks very much. There you go, huh?
So to people who are listening on the radio, it's sort of like what is it, like a Manet?
Oh yeah, it looks a bit like a painting, doesn't it?
It does. It's
lots of bright colour.
Yeah,
it's always a good thing just at the end of autumn. So yeah, the Westpac result, not bad, but flat, a flat result. So it wasn't. Considering the...
Give us the number before we weep a tear.
Okay. Yeah. Well, the number was $445 million.
So, and what period are we talking about?
That's a 6-month period, ended in March.
So that's a profit of $445 million over 6 months.
Yeah.
Forgive me if we don't have a whip around.
But again, it wasn't as big a profit as they've had in the past, and that's partly because of the low interest rate environment.
Right.
Yeah. And so their revenues...
That squeezes margins, does it?
Well, sure, because, interest rates help pay for their overheads, and of course, so that means that they've had to be quite sharp on their costs. Revenues are also flat. That means, because the interest income isn't what it used to be. However, the bank is, pretty bullish anyway, because they're looking at how to develop other markets, and they're really confident. And one of the things...
Because one of the things I shouldn't take the mickey about is that they have an enormous stake in the New Zealand property market.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, all those mortgages. So are they saying anything about it?
They are, in fact, which is quite interesting. And we have a little bit of audio. Yes, I interviewed the chief executive, Mr. McLean, David McLean, so we've got a little bit from him. But just before we run to that, he basically said that the house prices in Auckland are on the rise again. So the Reserve Bank brought in these lending restrictions for investors. So you had to put at least 30% down to buy a house if it was an investment property in Auckland. That has had a very limited impact in the sense that it's only been 6 months and the prices are away again. So we have a bit of David McLean explaining why that is.
We saw 2 waves of changes. The first one was when the Reserve Bank brought in the over 80% loan-to-value ratio limits. That took the heat out of the market for quite a while. And then last year, both the government's moves on requiring offshore buyers to have a tax account and a bank and a tax number, and the Reserve Bank moving on investor properties, that also took the heat out of the market for a while. But I think there's fundamental drivers in place, particularly in the Auckland market, that are pushing against those things. So they've had some effect, but it hasn't lasted.
Well, so were you there? Were you talking to?
Yep.
Yeah. So, what did he say? What the fundamental drivers were? What's he talking about?
He said the basic problem is that there aren't enough houses to satisfy the demand.
Supply and demand, right?
It's always the same issue. Yeah. And how do you address that quickly? Well, there's no answer to that. So, meanwhile, he says, "Hey, deposits are up. People are actually saving, still hoping that they'll be able to buy a house, and good luck to them, really." And so actually, I don't know if you've noticed this here. This little bank.
No, has a Westpac Rescue helicopter, and they are launching another appeal, are they? No, with a profit of $445 million. I hope they're putting some coins in the top themselves.
You're going to have to put some coins, quite a few coins in there, but they've just launched their appeal today. One of the things that the bank wanted to emphasize when they announced their, profit, was that they have been given back to the community. And one of the ways they do that, of course, is with rescuing people. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay. No, what happened on the markets today?
Well, look, hey, before we just run to the markets, the other big news of the day was Mighty River Power is changing its name to Mercury.
Right.
Yeah. They say that they're going to put all their effort into one brand, and, that's how they're going to drive their business forward.
Okay.
So they won't have a whole bunch of brands, just so you know.
Okay,
everybody knows that now.
Thank you very much.
And also, finally, then, for the NZX Top 50 Index, yes, it ended down about almost 0.5%. That's 29 points to 6,792. That's still quite high in terms of the market level. And the currency is trading again at 69.9 US cents. 92 cents Australian.
Nona Peltier, it's wonderful to have you back. Thank you so much, Nona, our Auckland-based business reporter. We're never let down by our excellent business team at RNZ. Right, a former coach of the Warriors and Kiwi Rugby League sides, Frank Endicott, says barring 6 Warriors players from playing in Friday night's Anzac Test against Australia can only improve the culture at the NRL club, although it has to be said the bar looks quite low at the moment. 3 players were made unavailable for selection for the Kiwis-Kangaroos clash after they and 3 other Warriors players broke team protocols after that 42-0 loss to Storm last week. They were also dropped to the Warriors reserve team for the weekend's clash with St George Illawarra. Frank Endicott told our sports reporter Barry Guy the decision to not only suspend the players from the NRL team but also bar them from representing their country is the kick in the pants the team needs.
I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that the two parties, the Warriors and the Kiwi bosses, are talking to, because Stephen Kearney has obviously bought into that decision that Jim Doyle has made to stand these players down. Stephen's very strong on team culture and discipline, and he would definitely go along with that decision. So, yeah, I support them.
It's not a bit heavy-handed, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, when the Warriors have been playing as ordinary as they have been, I think that the coach had to rattle the cage, and I thought it was a very brave decision that he made, and it's come out and paid off for him, and the players that took the place of the 6 suspended players certainly did their job. So I think it's a win-win all around, and I'm sure these 6 players won't make that decision, the wrong decision again.
Of course, with the run that they had and what subsequently has happened, there was the term that a bit of a culture at the Warriors has sort of continued. Would you want to comment on such a thing?
I think that this decision from the coach will actually help the culture in the Warriors, and I know Jim Doyle's very strong on culture, and he's played his part in this also. So I think only good can come out of it. I think something had to happen. It did happen, and we got a good result on the end of it. So I think the coach and the CEO at the Warriors, Jim Doyle, have come out on top.
So really, the cage needed to be rattled, and they've done it this way?
Well, the cage certainly had to be rattled, Barry, and as I say, they made the decision to drop players, and it's not an easy decision to make, but they made that tough call, and tough calls have got to be made by head coaches, and McFadden made that call, and it's paid off for him, and good on him.
As a coach yourself, though, you may have a soft spot for them, but I mean, obviously McFadden had to do something because, his neck was sort of starting to fall on the block a bit as well.
Oh, look, there's no doubt McFadden's been under heavy pressure, with a lot of critics saying that he should get the chop. So he was in a no-win situation, really, and he did what he had to do.
How would you expect those players to react, or should they react? They've had the slap on the wrist now, and, everyone's looking at them.
You've got to look at the way they played in the New South Wales Cup side the other day. All of those 6 players played very well, and I understand their attitudes have changed dramatically since the kick in the pants that they got, and it had to. So I wouldn't foresee, I'd be very surprised if they had any more trouble from those 6.
That is our sports reporter Barry Guy talking to Frank Endicott. I always like Frank. He cuts to the chase every time. The kick in the pants the team needs, he says. Just a quick note on a story we've been covering on RNZ News. The revelations that 2 Argentine brothers who were allowed to buy a Taranaki farm despite having criminal convictions for environmental pollution. We asked Louise Upston, the Minister for Land Information, whose responsibility, of course, for the Overseas Investment Office, to come on Checkpoint on Friday to discuss this. Ms Upston was unavailable for an interview as she was on leave, fair enough, but her office said she would be available this week for an interview. The OIA is now investigating the Onitai station consent. This is pretty controversial. We asked the Minister on to Checkpoint again today and also asked if we could speak with her about the process the OIA goes through before making decisions on consents. They are regarded in some quarters as very easy. This afternoon we were told she's unavailable for an interview today. When we asked why, her office said the investigation is ongoing and the Minister will refrain from commenting until she has all the facts. When we reiterated we still wanted to speak with Ms Upston more generally about the OIO and not just the specific case, we were told she was not available for an interview this evening. So we've asked for an interview with the Minister tomorrow. This is a fascinating case, the specific, which is the station, and the very high rate of approvals the OIO give, which is the general. We do hope to discuss it with the Minister. Judges are making progress in their efforts to extract more information about a defendant's family violence history. From today, a pilot scheme which provides judges with extra information when deciding bail in domestic violence cases will be extended to Wellington, Hutt Valley, Masterton, Whangarei, Kaikohe and Kaitaia. While anti-violence groups are welcoming the expansion, defence lawyers fear it will make it harder for domestic violence defendants to get bail. Catherine Hutton reports.
Justice Minister Amy Adams says the 3-month pilot was introduced in September last year at courts in Porirua and Christchurch, following feedback from judges that they didn't always have the best information available.
I shared those concerns, and we worked very quickly with the court registrars and the police to get that information together. Now what we want to do is extend it out to a wider group of courts across New Zealand so that we have a more comprehensive assessment as to whether it will make a significant difference.
The information, known as a judge's pack, contains details not usually handed up to a judge, including all police call-outs, safety and protection orders and any breaches. It's prepared by the court registrar and the police. Jane Drum, who heads the anti-violence group Shine, says often a defendant in a family violence case may not have many or any convictions, but they've had plenty of visits from the police.
A very small proportion of all the episodes of violence that police go out and have a look at ever end up in the court. So from a judge's perspective, this is a person who's new to the court, new to the criminal justice system.
Lawyer Craig Smith, who works in Porirua, says from a defence perspective there's a fear it adds more process and fails to consider that it's an individual standing in the dock. And he says from the list provided by the police, it's often difficult to gauge what's happened.
You don't really know what's happened other than a record of someone having called the police. Sometimes it's quite hard to work out which of the parties has called the police. Was it either of the parties or was it someone else at the address?
He says the latest pilot is one of a suite of changes in recent years, which began with the introduction of family violence courts about 5 years ago. As a result, he says it's now harder to get bail, particularly if the police oppose it. But holding people in custody can be disruptive to families and counterintuitive to family violence initiatives, which try to keep families together.
If you've got the breadwinner locked up, it takes too long to get him out. You do run the risk of them losing their job, then losing their housing court tenancies or rental tenancies, and then having to perhaps shift area to find other accommodation, and children having to start new schools.
Amy Adams can't say how long the pilot will run for, describing it as a rolling evaluation. At this stage, no extra money has been set aside, but the police and courts are working to determine what extra work is involved. Jane Drum, a former probation officer, says it will put pressure on the court system.
Once this rolls out particularly into the big courts, it's going to be very, very hard for them to gather all that information. It's not necessarily press a button and get a print off. It's more involved than that.
The police did not respond to requests for an interview. Meanwhile, in a statement, the judiciary says it demonstrates what can be achieved when those involved in the justice system work to bridge the gap between information and knowledge. For Checkpoint, Catherine Hutton.
Coming up to 13 minutes to 6 on Checkpoint. The Australian government will release its federal budget tomorrow. Ours is later in the month, and already it's being labelled a budget for billionaires. Malcolm Turnbull and his ministers are now under pressure to explain who will benefit from the income tax cuts it's suggesting will be part of the package. So far, the indications are that there will be tax relief for people earning more than $80,000 a year. Labor says that would leave 3/4 of Australians, and of course that includes many expat New Zealanders, without a tax cut. The ABC's political correspondent Louise Yaxley reports.
The rare timing of a budget being announced just days before a poll is called means it's at least as much an election manifesto. The Treasurer and the Prime Minister appeared before the cameras this morning with their campaign lines ready.
Our plan for jobs and growth.
Yep,
here it is, ready to go.
That's it. That's the key. 21st century economy, jobs and growth.
Earlier, Scott Morrison had been at a business promoting his budget but giving no details.
What we're doing in the budget tomorrow night is backing in companies like Lintec. With changes in the tax system, we'll support them to do the work, to save and reinvest back in their businesses. And that's what's important for the country.
It appears likely the government will announce company tax cuts, probably phased in to make them more affordable.
This budget is all about jobs and growth and backing in companies just like this one, which are increasing employment and getting the job done.
Labor's Treasury spokesman Chris Bowen is not promising to support company tax cuts.
We've made it clear that we don't see, with all the budget pressures, with all the cuts to health and education, the case for
corporate tax cuts for large companies in this budget.
Much of the budget won't be legislated until after the election. Mr Bowen says that gives tomorrow night's announcements a completely different complexion.
Tomorrow night's budget will be an election document, not an economic document. Tomorrow night's budget is an attempted alibi for the last 3 years. Malcolm Turnbull and Scott Morrison will try and convince the Australian people that actually the last 3 years didn't happen, that their attacks on schools and hospitals will be reversed, that their attacks on the retirement incomes of low-income earners will somehow be reversed. Tomorrow night, Scott Morrison will ask to be trusted on all the things that Tony Abbott, Malcolm Turnbull, Joe Hockey and he have attacked over the last 3 years.
The government's not confirming plans for a tax cut for people earning more than $80,000 a year, but Mr Morrison is not denying it.
The average full-time earnings in Australia is $80,000.
Chris Bowen says any tax cut on those figures will leave most workers without help.
The median income in Australia is about $64,000 and the average income of all wage earners is about $60,000, and about 75% of income earners would miss out on a tax cut which cut in at $80,000. The Treasurer appears unaware of that.
There are suggestions that cut would start on the 1st of July, the day before the election. For that to happen, legislation would have to be passed this week. Mr Morrison won't say if that's his plan.
Again, those details will be spelled out in the budget tomorrow night, and the legislative program will follow the usual course.
Greens MP Adam Bant says his party will vote against tax cuts.
This is a budget for billionaires where apparently there's not enough money for schools and hospitals, but they can fund a tax cut for the banks and Gina Rinehart. Well, the Greens won't have a bar of the unfair measures in this budget for billionaires. The Greens are calling on Labor to join with us in opposing tax cuts in this budget.
The budget will include money to the states for infrastructure projects, including major public transport and road schemes. Labor's spokesman Anthony Albanese says, though, it's not new money.
This is the asset recycling fund that was in the 2014 budget. There is no new infrastructure investment coming from this budget. This was a fund that was set up essentially to say the only way that we will fund infrastructure for public transport is if state governments sell their assets, the assets that people own.
That report from the ABC's Louise Yaxley. Fascinating business, Australian politics. Family and friends have gathered today to celebrate the life of renowned musician Bill Savesi. The acclaimed ukulele and steel guitar player, credited with popularising Hawaiian-style music in New Zealand and throughout the Pacific, died late last month at the age of 92. His contribution was immeasurable, really. How many Kiwi kids have picked up the uke, particularly in the past few years? Our reporter Tom Furley was at the funeral service in Auckland.
The organ was replaced by the ukulele today at the Holy Trinity Cathedral in Parnell when Bill Savesi's family and friends were greeted by Mount Roskill Primary School students. Tongan-born Wilfred Jeffs, known by his stage name Bill Savesi, was a stalwart of Auckland's music scene in the 1950s through to the 1970s. With his band, the Islanders, Savesi packed out dance halls like Auckland's Orange Ballroom for almost 20 years. Speaking on behalf of the Tongan community, Sefita Hauli said Savesi was a Tongan legend.
He actually brought most of the Pacific people together into one forum, and so did he bring a lot of Pākehā and Māori in as well. So you'll find that the exotic mixtures of part Samoan, part Tongan, part Cook Island, part Niuean, it would have been Bill's Orange Ballroom that helped to make that all possible.
Considered by many the godfather of the ukulele, Sefita Hauli told mourners Savesi's music helped shape the sound of the Pacific.
Bill has developed chords and a sound out of that instrument that has become iconic, in fact, to be part of our region. And for that, Tonga and the rest of the Pacific community will always be grateful.
Broadcaster and journalist Phil Gifford remembered the huge part Savesi's music played in his childhood as he grew up watching his band at Waihi Beach.
He actually brought a Pacifica influence to New Zealand music before that word was even being used. And he would often, when he played dances, his band, the Islanders, would play the pop hits of the day but they had an absolutely unique twist to them because he would lead on a Hawaiian steel guitar, which is a very unusual instrument, which he obviously played beautifully.
Savesi dedicated much of his later life to education, including working with the Play It Strange program, teaching school children his signature instrument. The importance of getting children into music was something he highlighted last year when he was inducted into the New Zealand Music Hall of Fame.
Remember always, the flowers will grow from the seeds that you sow. Music can give you happiness, anything you want all over the world.
The chief executive of Play It Strange and founding member of Split Enz, Mike Chun, paid tribute not just to Savesi's musical ability, but his personal qualities.
For you, it was about people. We can talk about instruments, we can talk about recordings, we can talk about songwriting. Songwriting's the foundation, but it's the love of your fellow man that drives his vision on. People are united, and you are the man behind it, Bill. You are and will always be a beautiful person, and I salute you.
Bill Savesi was farewelled today, but he lives on in New Zealand's musical history. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
Yeah, he truly was a beautiful old cat, Bill Savesi. Lovely piece, Tom. Thank you. We've got 5.5 minutes to talk about the weather, and there's lots to talk about with Georgina Griffiths, who is a Met Service meteorologist. Thank you for coming in, Georgina. It's fascinating. Balmy autumn just keeps going on. Met Service, you guys, says April was extremely sunny, warm and dry in many parts of the country. Hit us with the records. What did Nelson do?
Oh, records April sunshine for Nelson. So that's an all-time record there. And, yeah, sunny. And Wellington.
In recorded history, Nelson?
Yes, since records began in the early 40s. So a long record there, 75-year record. And yeah, I mean, everyone who lives in Nelson knew it was a sunny month. I mean, what about the capital? What an amazing dry and sunny run of weather for Wellington, Wairarapa. Getting a little bit concerningly dry in those regions. But Wellington, 1 in 30-year April sunshine. So everyone in the capital, they've been out there. T-shirt weather sometimes.
Yes, Wellington is, people are so delighted when there's an Indian summer, right, when it just lasts.
Yes. Well, I mean, with good reason. It doesn't happen every autumn or winter. So, yeah, it's been a great run around central New Zealand. Has been the driest and the sunniest sort of focal point for the country. But overall, most regions have been dry. Everywhere's been warm. I mean, wow, in Invercargill, second warmest April, it's 2 degrees, running 2 degrees warm down there. Southland farmers will be recognising that.
So this is average temperature is 2 degrees up on usual?
Yeah, for this month.
Wow.
Yeah, most other parts of the country closer to 1.5, but still.
So in percentage terms, that's way over 10%, isn't it? Because the average would be well under 20 this time of year, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so we cracked 20 in Invercargill today, and yesterday Ashburton got 24, and, you know, that's pretty good for May.
So we're all grinning from ear to ear, but I need to ask you, is this climate change, is it global warming, or is it actually just a micro event, something that you can detect near?
So I think we have to remember that 2016 has been running abnormally warm. I mean, we're running record warm. Last year, this time last year, we were also very warm. But there's some real physical reasons why we've had the warmth, and it's not going away anytime soon. So we've had highs in the New Zealand region since the start of the year, dry for many places. We've had a lot of northerlies, a virtual absence of those southerlies. You know, if you lived in Christchurch or Marlborough or Wellington, Wairarapa, you'll have gone, oh, no southerlies really. Or if they do come in, they've been very brief. And the seas around the country, very, very warm, particularly Tasman seaside, so places like Nelson, Bulla, all along the west coast of South Island, very warm with those seas. And of course, most of our main cities are right next to the sea,
that's right.
And we get some of that warmth coming in. So there's some good physical reasons that aren't going to go away anytime soon, you know, as we enter May. And the reason why, you know, we're talking, Met Service is talking, let's think ahead, is that the May forecast temperatures are up to 2 degrees around that central New Zealand region again, looking forward the next month. And if we do run 2 degrees warmer as we go to May in those regions, you know, you're going to break records around those places.
Right.
Rest of the country is still looking remarkably warm for May. The temperature predictions are well up there. You don't see that every day.
No, you don't. Okay, winter feed's already going out in some regions, which just shouldn't be happening, but that's because of low rainfall. So are we starting to look at really bad drought conditions going into winter?
Oh, it's abnormally dry now in many North Island places, and I talked about that focal area of Wairarapa in particular, concerningly low rainfall for 2 or 3 months now. Wellington also running very dry. I mean, there is some relief, dry this week for the North Island, but next week, for the first time, our little high that's been sitting around New Zealand mostly, I mean, it goes away for a while, has a week's vacation, comes back. Over the last 4 months, it's been the major player for us, and it takes a little bit of a break next week, so most places it's the best chance we're going to get for a little while to get some rain in the gauge. The West Coast's been raining well, but what's new down there?
Yeah.
But these are for the dry areas in the North and East, South Island and the North Island
So
areas.
do you think, I know we're still talking a week away, but do you think we may see some material rain, some meaningful rain?
Most areas will get useful rain. I don't think it's a drought breaker, but I think it's good, and we'd like to see some more of that as we trend towards June. And of course we will. Winter, New Zealand doesn't lack winter usually once we head into June and July. The key thing for most people though is I haven't got my flannelette sheets out yet. I haven't lit the heater or the fire. Obviously Southerners might have once or twice, but barely put a sweatshirt on. It's been t-shirt weather, that warmth prevailing.
Okay. Now we have to be up. The Pip's going to get rid of us in 1 minute and 5 seconds. But I'm going to ask you about the ski season. At this stage, we're not even close to seeing snow, are we? Or even close to being close.
So it's not all bad news. Often we have a good run up till June, mid-June or so, for temperatures, and we know. When it's really, really warm, if you line up all your ducks, snow's a very specific thing that you need 5 or 6 things all lined up. We have had very broad, very deep snow in previous warm late winter. It's going to be late winter though, not early winter.
Right.
Okay. So I'm not ruling out a reasonable ski season at the moment. It's too early to say that.
But we won't see that until what, July?
We'll have a look at June when we get there. June's going to be crux, I think, for the ski season, late June.
Okay.
Talk soon on that.
Georgina Griffiths, when you come in, I just grin at you from ear to ear because you are a tour de force of talking about the weather. No notes, nothing to hand. I could say to you, tie happy, and you would give me a breakdown.
Probably could.
Brilliant. Georgina Griffiths, who is the Met Service meteorologist and has joined us in the studio in Auckland. Thank you. It's wonderful to talk to you as always.
Welcome. Thanks, John.
Georgina Pips. Kia ora everyone, you are with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Lovely to have your company. I'm John Campbell on behalf of our excellent team. Thank you for being with us. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, our remaining 30 minutes tonight, Christchurch's flawed flood modelling and what it means for some homeowners. In short, are their homes half a metre too low? The increasing number of New Zealanders living alone and why trophy hunting is preferable to poaching. All of that and more coming up in the next 30 minutes. But first, here's the news with Katrina Batten.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. The Cancer Society says there's enough information currently available to justify funding a new class of drug for advanced melanoma. Information received by Checkpoint shows the maker of Keytruda, Merck Sharp and Dohme, has complained to the Health Minister over Pharmac's use of evidence about the drug. It said Pharmac had not reported on findings it provided, but continued to argue there was not enough proof of Keytruda's effectiveness. The Society's medical director, Chris Jackson, told Checkpoint cancer experts believe Keytruda and an equivalent drug, Opdivo, are effective.
When you've got a newer drug, you can always say, well, we'll have more information in 6 months, we'll have more information in 2 years, we'll have more information in 5 years. Of course, you will. But is there enough information today to recommend these new drugs as the new standard of care for patients in our care? And the answer very clearly, in the opinion of every oncologist I've spoken to, is clearly yes.
Chris Jackson of the Cancer Society. A tax expert is questioning the way the hospital catering company Compass is paying its taxes following a series of loans made to its British parent. Intra-company loans are one tool multinationals use to legally move money between subsidies to avoid paying tax. Anusha Bradley reports.
Compass New Zealand paid $2 million in tax last year, just over 1% of its revenue of $170 million. The company has high costs, but accounts filed with the company's office show its British parent has borrowed $33 million over the past 4 years, while fees and royalties have quadrupled. A tax consultant, Terry Boucher, says intra-company loans are commonly used by multinationals to shift money around, and it's interesting these loans have never been repaid. Compass says there are no loans, even though it calls them that in its accounts. It has declined to say what they're for or if they're a way of avoiding tax. This is Anusha Bradley.
A community group helping Christchurch homeowners get fair insurance settlements says it has found huge discrepancy in the City Council's flood modelling. Empower Christchurch says because the council has set incorrect minimum floor levels for new homes, some are almost 50 centimetres lower than they should be. As a result, it says new insurance rebuilds are significantly lower than the minimum required to protect against flooding. A council spokesman, Peter Sparrow, says surveys of 5 properties that may be affected have been ordered. He says the council has advised insurers through the Insurance Council to use updated information for any assessments or building work. The police are redeploying breathalyzers withdrawn last year because some of them were giving inaccurate readings. A malfunction affected the readings recorded by 17% of the Draeger devices, and all 400 were recalled in October. The National Manager of Road Policing, Steve Greeley, says that after extensive scientific testing at its laboratory in Germany, Draeger identified and resolved the problem. From tomorrow, 200 of the breathalyzers will be reintroduced in test mode, and if there are no further problems, all 400 will be back on the job in August. The man accused of a cold case murder took an undercover police officer to the spot where the bodies of his ex-partner and her daughter were later found. Kamal Reddy has denied murdering Pakiza Yusuf and her 3-year-old daughter, Jariah Kalim. Edward Gay reports from the High Court in Auckland.
Extensive suppression orders cover the trial, but RNZ News can report that undercover officers gained Mr Reddy's trust after he took part in simulated criminal scenarios. He told them he'd killed Miss Yusuf and her daughter and buried their bodies under a bridge on Auckland's North Shore. Giving evidence in a closed court today, an undercover officer told the court Mr Reddy took him to the location 2 times and showed him where he'd buried the bodies. The officer is yet to be cross-examined. At the High Court in Auckland, Edward Gay.
2 teenagers have been charged over a stabbing in West Auckland on Friday night. The police say the victim is in a stable condition in hospital after being stabbed in the chest as he sat in a car with one of the accused, a 15-year-old girl whom he'd met on a social media dating app. The girl and a 14-year-old boy have been charged with causing grievous bodily harm with intent to rob. They're also charged with aggravated robbery after a separate incident on Friday morning at a Massey petrol station. To sport, the former Warriors and Kiwis coach Frank Endicott fully backs the decision to make 6 Warriors players unavailable for national duty. The players were stood down for the Warriors game against the Dragons yesterday for breaching team protocol and weren't considered for international duty this weekend, including Friday's test against Australia. Kiwis coach Stephen Kearney has said he was part of the decision. Endicott says it's a good decision by both the Warriors and the Kiwis, and it's not heavy-handed.
When the Warriors have been playing as ordinary as they have been, I think that the coach had to rattle the cage, and I thought it was a very brave decision that he made, and it's come out and paid off for him, and the players that took the place of the 6 suspended players certainly did their job. So I think it's a win-win all around, and I'm sure these 6 players won't make the wrong decision again.
Frank Endicott. Meanwhile, the New Zealand Herald reports 5 of the players stood down admitted to taking prescription drugs and energy drinks on their late night out last week. The New Zealand Rugby Sevens coach Sir Gordon Titchens has included injured captain Scott Curry in his Olympic trial squad. Curry will travel with the 16-man squad for the last 2 tournaments of the World Series but won't play. The squad also includes Augustine Pulu, Sonny Bill Williams and Liam Messam. That's the news.
G'day, Paul Brennan in for Brian Crump this week on Nights, and tonight historian and author Jock Phillips is in to talk about his latest book, To the Memory, New Zealand's War Memorials. There are more than 1,000 of them throughout the country. Who erected them and why? We have science, specifically New Zealand native fish ecology, with self-confessed native fish geek, author and field worker Stella McQueen. And in our investigative documentary program Insight, Kate Gunsel investigates exactly what the government's planned social bonds are. And there's more tonight on Nights after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather now through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waikato, also Coromandel Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Fine spells and isolated showers. Waitomo, Taumaranui and northern Taranaki, cloudy periods and a few showers. Manawatu, Whanganui, Taihape and southern Taranaki, fine with high cloud. Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine with variable high cloud. Brief rain in Wairarapa tomorrow morning. Wellington, Horowhenua and Kapiti Coast, a few showers developing this evening, turning to occasional rain tomorrow. Nelson and Bulla, rain developing in Bulla this evening with heavy falls, scattered falls spreading to Nelson at times. Canterbury and Marlborough mainly fine, scattered rain developing about northern and western Marlborough overnight. Westland and Fiordland, rain with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms easing to coastal showers in Fiordland late afternoon and clearing from Westland overnight. Otago and Southland, scattered rain clearing this evening and becoming fine, and the Chatham Islands mostly cloudy. It is just gone 6:08.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. A community group says the Christchurch City Council's flawed flood modelling has been flawed, and some homes have been either rebuilt or in the process of being rebuilt, almost 50 centimetres lower than they should be. Empower Christchurch, a group set up to help homeowners get fair insurance settlements, so the full extent of the problem has not been determined. It says the council held an urgent meeting last Tuesday, giving the group an assurance it would revise its flood modelling. 79-year-old Jeanette Brown is one of the affected residents. Her house has been rebuilt 50 centimetres lower than it should have been in the area it's in. She only moved back into her new house 4 months ago. Yes, new house after the earthquake. I spoke to her this afternoon with her advocate from Empower Christchurch, Seamus O'Crontha. I asked Seamus how he found out about this situation.
The surveyor that worked on my house was also working on a property in South Shore, and he noticed there was a 44 centimetre difference between the flood planning that council applied in Rocking Horse Road in South Shore and at my place. So he contacted the council and asked for an explanation, and they arranged a very hurried meeting with us the Tuesday after Anzac holiday and explained that they had assumed that a tidal flood bank would be built along Bridge Street halfway down the peninsula here. So they had applied different flood levels for the southern part of the suburb as they did for the northern part of the suburb.
And has that been
Which
built?
We were quite
has that flood prevention bank been built?
We have no evidence that it was even considered building. It hasn't been built. You know.
It hasn't been repaired either.
Well, that's another.
Yeah.
There's a stop bank further north which hasn't been repaired, and we've been asking council what they're planning to do about it for years. But we still have had no information that they intend to repair it or rebuild it or provide people with protection against flooding.
So, Seamus, I want to clarify,
So
had
really
you
is
not
quite
had
bizarre.
a builder that was working somewhere else who observed that you were 44 centimetres lower than the other place he was at, you and the Christchurch City Council would have had no idea about this?
I don't know how much idea Christchurch City Council had, but I certainly would have had no idea. I just find it difficult to believe that rebuilds and PIMs and consents for building have been issued for the last 4 or 5 years without Christchurch City Council knowing in full about this situation.
That you are too low and that means you are going to be flood prone. Is it that simple?
That's the simplicity of it. That's why I blocked a rebuild, but the lady I'm with here, she wasn't informed that her insurance company would use existing use rights and continue with the build. So she's ended up with a property that is, half a metre lower than it should be to provide protection against flooding.
So that property
And now the
has
damage
been
is
rebuilt, Seamus, and signed off on, and that is now complete and ready to go, but it is roughly half a metre too low, which means that it will flood disproportionately often.
Absolutely. On the other side of the road here, we have a house where we have groundwater going round the surface of the house like a moat. This has been ignored by everybody. So we have the flooding risk in conjunction with the high groundwater risk. It's making very, very difficult to see what's going to happen here.
What discussions have you had with the council?
We had an emergency meeting with them on the Tuesday after Anzac Day, and we asked them to explain how this had happened and why they had used incorrect flood modelling. And we were told that this was not incorrect. This was merely an assumption which they had revised. A solution has to be found. People have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars of their equity as a result of this situation, and we're just waiting to hear what kind of solution they propose to recompense them.
Seamus,
the situation goes on because we still...
Sorry. Seamus,
Yes,
would
John?
you mind asking Jeanette what she's going to do? Because she's got a new home there, but it's flood prone. And would you mind just pretending you're interviewing her and put the mic across to her when you ask?
Sure, yeah. Jeanette, you've been here for how long?
Nearly 4 months now.
And you were never happy with the situation to start with, were you?
No, I was never happy. I did argue the point, but I gave up. I gave up. I couldn't afford lawyers to fight for me, so I gave up.
And what do you think what are your plans for the future? What would you like to
Well,
do?
what I would like to do, I would like to sell my property at my age and go into a retirement complex, and I can't sell it the way it is. I've lost equity in it. I won't have sufficient funds to even go somewhere else.
So that was Jeanette talking to Seamus at the end of that interview. So in short, Jeanette has had a rebuild. Her house is 50 centimetres too low. It makes it disproportionately likely to be affected by flooding in that area. We asked Christchurch City Council for an interview. It sent us a statement saying it has now revised its flood modelling for floor levels in a small area of New Brighton. It says the previous modelling did not fully account for the effect of tidal flooding in the lower reaches of the Avon in that small area as a result of future predicted sea level rise over the next 50 years. General Manager Consenting and Compliance Peter Sparrow says the council has ordered surveys of 5 properties that may be affected by change in assumptions to ascertain any floor level issues specific to each site. Mr Sparrow says the council has also advised insurers to use the updated information for any assessment or building work in this area. And Empower Christchurch told us a short time ago it believes many more than 5 homeowners are affected across Christchurch, and it's holding a residents' meeting tomorrow night. We are going to keep an eye on this issue. The time on Checkpoint is 6:14. The undercover police officer who spent 6 months befriending a man accused of a cold case murder has told the court he got the accused to pose for a photo in the spot where 2 bodies were later found. Kamal Reddy has denied murdering his ex-partner Pakisa Yusuf and her 3-year-old daughter Juwairia Khalim. He's on trial at the High Court in Auckland, where an undercover police officer who can't be named has been given evidence about secret recordings of conversations he had with the accused. The court has been closed to the public, but our court reporter Edward Gay has been there and he joins me now. Obviously, Edward, heavy suppression orders and all that kind of stuff. What do we know about this undercover police investigation?
Well, what we can say is it was a 6-month-long investigation, and it involved a series of simulated criminal scenarios being undertaken. We can't say much more than that, but we can say today that this undercover officer, he was actually taken to the site, and this is under a Takapuna motorway bridge, and he got the accused to pose for a photograph in the spot where the accused says that he buried the bodies. The accused also talked about taking hours to dig this big hole, enough for both of the bodies, and he described dragging the bodies to that spot.
Okay, was there any discussion about why these killings were carried out, allegedly?
Well, there was a bit of limited discussion about this. The accused, Mr. Reddy, talked about how he had organised a house for Miss Yusuf, how he had paid the rent and bought furniture. He said that she was demanding money all the time, and said that she created a scene when his mother came out to visit them. He also believed that she was cheating on him. He said he wasn't supposed to be in contact with her at the time, and he described a previous assault. On the night, he says that she threatened to call the police. He went outside and later came back in, and he described the night as a horrible night.
Right. Details also given of the killing?
That's right. In earlier conversations played in court, Mr. Reddy described using an iron cord while Miss Yusuf was asleep. He also smothered her daughter. He later also he said that he also talked about the police investigation, that police came knocking. He said that the police used the full force, but only began investigating some years later. He said he got rid of documents that tied him to Miss Yusuf, and he confirmed taking money from her account, but he said that he stopped this soon after the killing. At the same time, the defence case is that all these conversations happened after the 6-month-long investigation, that effectively Mr. Reddy had been groomed by the undercover police officers. In his opening statement, the defence lawyer Jonathan Krebs said that his client had made this false confession and that another man was responsible.
Incredible case, Edward Gay. Thank you very much, Edward, who's been sitting in the court. A lot of this is close to the public, isn't it, Edward?
It is.
Thank you very much indeed. More and more people in New Zealand are living alone, according to a new report from Statistics New Zealand. The report also reveals most of those living by themselves, about 2/3 were divorced, separated or widowed. Maya Burry starts her report with 3 New Zealanders living solo.
I've been living alone for several years now. For me, it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you don't have any flatmate issues. On the other hand, it can get a bit lonely.
I've been living alone since August 2011. I do not play well with others. Living alone is pretty much the best thing that's ever happened to me. You're totally responsible for all your own stuff. So, for example, if there's dishes in the sink, then you know they're yours and you don't have to get angry about someone else not doing them.
I've been living alone, quite a long time. I can't even think how long. And at first it was terrible. When you get to my age, it's a lot more common. And I often see them, I live in Wellington in an apartment, and I see other people and I think, it's a shame we don't all sort of connect.
The report by Statistics New Zealand looked at the latest available census data from 2013 and found there were 355,000 people, or about 11% of the country's population living alone. That's almost 50,000 more than in 2001. Its social statistics manager Scott Usher says living alone is a relatively recent trend in society, but one that's becoming increasingly common.
You're more likely to live alone the older you get. It is around 44% of people who live alone are 65 years or older, and there's still a quarter of people in 2013 who lived alone were 75 years or older. So it's still primarily the older, widowed or divorced people.
Scott Usher says 50% of people living alone said they felt lonely, compared to 34% of people living with others. The report also found New Zealand European or European ethnicities had the highest rates of people living alone, whilst Pacific and Asian ethnic groups were less likely. Massey University demographer Professor Paul Spoonley says while there's been a shift in attitudes with more people living alone, it's not always for the best.
I think there's quite an interesting debate about what the advantages or disadvantages are of living alone. Myself, I think the advantages of living alone are actually somewhat exaggerated, because I think we are social people.
There's also a gender imbalance in the statistics. Older women are more likely to live alone because of the difference in life expectancy between men and women. From 2012 to 2014, women were expected to live just beyond 83, nearly 4 years longer than men. The head of Age Concern Canterbury, Simon Templeton, says it can be hard for older people to live on their own.
Isolation and loneliness is a big issue for older people. Certainly the majority of people that we interact with as an agency are women, because they have a longer life expectancy. So where there's a partner death later in life, it is more likely to be the man.
Mr Templeton says the number of people living alone is still expected to continue rising. For Checkpoint, Maya Burry.
It's 21.5 which means in 8.5 minutes on Well Watch PM at 6:30 with John Greaves. Lots of foreign news tonight, but a rise in anti-Semitism in Britain. Huge controversy inside the Labour Party too. That's been an incredible story, and a warning that people with albinism face systemic extinction. That's coming up with John in just over 8 minutes on Well Watch PM. Kenya torched more than $200 million worth of ivory yesterday as a strong display of its commitment to ending the illegal trade. Demand for ivory in Asia leads to between 30 and 40,000 African elephants being killed every year. With just 500,000 of the elephants left, poaching is having a huge impact on the animals across the continent. The best way to protect the animals is to give them a real economic value to communities, obviously. In places like Kenya, tourism can bring in money, but in the northeast of Namibia, there are few tourists, and so it's hunting elephants that's bringing in money, poaching. And despite its many opponents, the trophy hunting has helped elephant and buffalo populations increase by up to 20%. This is trophy hunting, as the BBC's Alistair Leathead reports.
At a watering hole in northeastern Namibia, around 200 elephants suddenly emerge from the forest and rush into the water. It's an amazing sight. They splash their trunks, the young noisily chase each other. It's the kind of thing tourists travel the world to see. But at the rate elephants are currently being killed, this kind of spectacle could be gone in our lifetimes. And here in Namibia, there's a surprising approach to saving the elephant. Hunting.
We have a professional hunter who can hunt elephants and buffaloes. And then he sells the ivory, we get the money.
Chunga Chunga is talking about trophy hunting. He's chairman of Bamuna Conservancy, a parcel of land next to the national park where the community is responsible for managing their own wildlife.
For now, the elephant is $135,000.
That's Namibian dollars. That's about 10,000 US dollars.
Yes.
Okay, and what does that money get used for?
We get, employment, use the money for development.
They are getting meat from the animals that are hunted by professional hunters. They're employing people, and also through development. Some of the conservancies are busy putting up electricity.
Bright Zanzilla is the man from the Ministry of Environment and Tourism.
There is no way you can manage poaching if you are putting the community on the side. All the money that is coming from hunting is plowed back to the community, 100%. The government of Namibia does not take a cent from that money.
So we're on the back of a vehicle now. We just entered the hunting area of the Conservancy. We've got a couple of guides on the back here, keeping a lookout, trying to see if there are any buffalo around, because it's a buffalo that the hunters have got their license for, they've got their permit to shoot, and that's what we're heading out with them to try and find. I must say it is a bit strange in this case, going out on what you'd call a game drive, looking for animals, knowing that if we see a buffalo or see tracks of a buffalo, that the guys in this car are going to get out, are going to track it, and they're going to shoot it. It's an odd feeling.
Stop, this buffalo, buffalo.
Well, the hunters spotted some buffalo tracks in the car and stopped. And they're now tracking the buffalo through the grass and through the trees.
Well, it's not that fresh, but it's probably early last night.
David Miller is the professional hunter in this conservancy.
Trophy hunting is supposedly to take out the older animals. It's going to die in 2-3 years anyway. Why let it die of old age if it can raise some money for a community like that and benefit from it? And wild animals, buffalo, elephant, anything, it's like cattle. You can't run a farm and just keep on breeding cattle because you're going to have too much eventually and nothing's going to survive because there's not going to be any grazing for it. People who so dead set against hunting don't have all the facts on what it's all about.
Well, that trail led nowhere, and there was no sign of a buffalo in the area surrounding us, so the hunters are now heading back to the car. It can take many days to track and find the right animal that they want to shoot.
You approach an audience with a local chief who wears a tuxedo and a leopard skin hat on your knees, clapping with cupped palms. He supports the hunting arrangement. Wildlife numbers have increased by 20 to 25%, he said, warning that without hunting, the poachers who have literally become gamekeepers could go back to poaching again. Chairman Chunga Chunga agrees.
If they close the hunting, that will affect us very much because we will no longer be able to develop our areas and we will no longer get employment.
It's about giving these animals a real value to the people whose crops they destroy, whose children they sometimes kill, and certainly not just for the Westerners to come and visit.
The report from the BBC. We're just interested in people in Christchurch. We're just discussing, just prior to that report from the BBC, about a situation where some people may be in areas that have been signed off 50 centimetres lower than they should be due to flood damage. If you think you are in that area, or if you've had communication with the council about that, we would love to hear from you. Do text 2101 or Checkpoint, probably our email address, checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. If you are in that situation, you think you are in that situation, or you're talking to the council about it, we'd love to hear from you. Checkpoint@radionz.co.nz is our email address, and if you want to deal with us off the record, that is totally fine. Obviously. It's 28 minutes past 6, and we're going to end tonight with, well, dear old Prince. What a wonderful musician, and a pretty magnificent dresser. A jacket worn by him in his 1984 film Purple Rain is going to auction. I guess this was what happens, isn't it, when pop stars die? The motorcycle bikie jacket is expected to sell for more than $100,000. Yiming Woon from Reuters with the story.
This biker jacket is one of few items of pop star Prince ever to be put on sale. Auction organizer Brian Chain says it was initially expected to fetch around $6,000, but his death has driven estimates beyond $100,000.
We are very excited about this particular jacket. It came in, incidentally, about 6 weeks ago, prior to the untimely death of Prince. It is from Purple Rain, and it was the iconic motorcycle jacket that he wore while Apollonia was in the back of the motorcycle.
The auction will be held on June 29th in California, and international bidders can participate through the internet. Prince died unexpectedly in his home on April 21st at the age of 57. Officials are still investigating the cause.
Officials still investigating, and the media wildly speculating. That brings Checkpoint to an end for this evening. Thank you for joining us on your radio, your television, online, or however you chose to connect with us tonight. You can hear highlights of Checkpoint and 9 to noon, morning report, midday report, all of it in late edition at 10:15 this evening. Any of our stories, you can get them on the excellent RNZ website, and our page is rnz.co.nz/checkpoint. And for all the latest news, information, feature stories from New Zealand and around the world, just go to the RNZ homepage. That's Checkpoint for tonight. We'll be back at 5 o'clock tomorrow night. Thank you for being with us.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Cancer Society says enough information is available for Pharmac to justify funding a new drug for advanced melanoma. The Society's medical director, Chris Jackson, told Checkpoint cancer experts believe Keytruda and an equivalent drug, Opdivo, are effective. A tax consultant is questioning the way the catering firm Compass is paying its taxes, following millions of dollars of loans made to its British parent, which have not been repaid. A community group has found the floors of some newly built Christchurch homes are too low to protect against flooding. Empower Christchurch says because the council has set incorrect minimum floor levels for new homes, some are almost 50 centimetres lower than they should be. And an American tourist has been charged with causing the deaths of 2 people in a crash near Kerikeri on Sunday. Our next news and weather is at 7.